Well, hello. Today we're going to be talking about the word proportion. As you look at this word proportion, I'd like you to think about situations or other areas in your life where maybe you have heard words that make you think of proportion or sound like proportion. For our lesson, we're going to look at proportion as comparing one part to the whole of something. So right over here in this illustration, I have a figure that I found, and we're going to use his head as a comparison. We're going to say there are 7 heads that make up his entire body height. So we're looking at one part of him compared to the whole. So that's what we're going to look at when we say proportion. You may be thinking about portion size, like foods, and we'll talk about that. Or maybe it has to do with ratios in math class. In art, there are different types of proportions. There's more like realistic, what we think of as looking right to our eye, and sometimes that's called mathematical proportions. There's exaggerated proportion. So like anime characters and Disney characters, they have huge eyes. Those are exaggerated features. And then hierarchical proportions. Think about a hierarchy in social studies class where something may be of more importance, like the emperor is more important than the government officials who are more important than their workers. Okay, and that's a hierarchy looking at the importance. And so people who are doing art proportionally for hierarchical proportions make the most important things huge and the least important things small. Egyptians were really famous for doing this. Okay, so just to kind of review, proportion, we're looking at one part to the whole. So here's a piece of pie cut into 6 slices. Grandma got one, Grandpa got one. So they took 2 of those pieces out. Okay, a third of the pie is gone. But you're looking at one part, one pie piece compared to the whole. Here we're looking at the proportion of water to the entire globe. And this is saying that 70% of the world is made up of water. You probably already knew that fact, but we're comparing one part, the water, to the whole. That's the proportion of water to the earth. Okay, here we're looking at food, and this is more what I think of with proportion. I think of portion size. If I look at my plate, a large portion of it, or proportion, should be vegetables. More vegetables than anything else on my plate. Okay, here we're looking at percentage of water in your body, and I thought this was interesting. Depending on whether you are more female or male or a child or an adult, you have different proportions of water. Okay, here's 60% made of water compared to the whole body. Here's something you use probably a lot, and that is cleaning products. So like here's some hand sanitizer, and that 60% is made up of isopropyl alcohol, which is rubbing alcohol, compared to the rest, which should be like aloe and scents and a lot of water. Here's isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol. It's actually only 70% of the whole is made up of that rubbing alcohol. The rest is water. So here's an example for art. When we look at this, we're looking at proportions, comparing parts to the whole. And here on the left, you can see this person, minus their ears and hair and neck, they look fairly proportionate. They look fairly normal. Whereas when you look at this person, you're like, whoa, what's going on? And it could be that the nose is too short compared to the head, or the mouth is too low compared to the head, the whole head placement. So that's how we're going to be looking at proportion in art. We're going to look at one part compared to where it fits on the whole of the body structure. Kids have a very unique way of looking at proportion, or rather they don't look at proportion so much. Here is an illustration similar to what my youngest child did years ago. I think he was 3, and he was drawing, maybe 4. And I was so excited, and I said, oh my gosh, what did you make? And he said, well, it's you, Mom. I said, oh, wow, that looks great. And he was explaining, here's my hair. My eyes must be very, very high on my head. At least I wasn't frowning. And we got down to this part. I'm like, wow, first of all, the arms could drag on the ground, but that's okay. And I said, what are these things, honey? And he said, those are your arm hairs, Mom. Okay, so evidently what he was paying more attention to was not my proportions, but the details that he saw. I don't think my arms are that hairy. You can be the judge. But Da Vinci, as people grow up, they make more observations. Da Vinci is huge for deciding, or rather pointing out, what people's proportions should be. And that's what we're going to be looking at the next couple of days, is looking at body proportions. How far down is your belly button? How far down are your shoulders? How wide are your shoulders? How about your comparing your arm width to your total height? So we're going to be looking at all those different proportions. Our first step is we're going to start with the basics. We're going to be drawing some stick figures. So at this point, I need you to do a couple things. You're going to think about, if I had to define proportion, how could I define it? Because I'm going to ask you to. Okay, proportion is comparing one part to the whole of something. Okay, and then how could I relate proportion to something in the real world? So how can I define proportion, and how can I relate it to something in the real world? At this point, I want you to stop this video, send me a Canvas message answering those two questions. Here's how I define proportion, and here's an example of how we might use proportion in the real world.